Welcome back to Awakening Reformation, where Reformation awakens now. My name is Grant, and tonight joined with me is my beautiful wife Erica, the weaker vessel.
Hello.
And George, the seasoned saint.
Hey all.
If you'd like to get to know more about Awakening Reformation podcast, you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can email us at awakeningreformation@gmail.com. We would also appreciate if you would go to iTunes and rate and review us, or you can review us on Facebook as well. We would greatly appreciate it, and we would love to just engage with you and talk with you. And tonight, we are going to be talking about Passover. The Easter season is upon us, and the Feast of Passover would have been held during this time, so we thought it would be a good time to talk about Passover. How's everybody doing tonight?
Last fall, when we first started the podcast, I talked about my grandson, Colin, who had the staph infection. We got really good news last week that he has been fully cleared by his physician, saying I am very thankful. He was a sick pup.
Like his grandpa.
And thanks, Erica.
You have had the flu twice this year already.
I meant more mentally, but...
that was horrible, getting sick twice inside of a month or a month and a half. That was not my idea of a good time.
Well, if only the sickness in your head would go away now.
You better be looking in the mirror when you say that, my young friend.
I love you, George. So with that, let's talk about Passover. The Passover story we find in Exodus chapter 12. It is the 10th plague that God rains down on Egypt, and it's the final plague before the people of Israel are let go and are taken out of their captivity. The reason why they're in captivity, if you remember the story of Joseph, the guy with a fancy coat given to him by his father, his brothers were jealous and sold him into slavery, but then he did so well and was blessed by God in Egypt that he ended up in a very high government position in Egypt, and ended up, through God helping him interpret dreams, he rose to power, helped Egypt save food over 7 years of plenty, and then they were able to sustain the area during 7 years of famine. During that time, his brothers and then his dad, Jacob, came down to Egypt to get food, and through a course of events, Joseph realizes it's his brothers and then brings them and his dad and their whole family down to Egypt so that they can survive. The Pharaoh at that time obviously loved Joseph, and the family did well, but over the course of time, the next Pharaoh did not care about Joseph's family or any of their descendants and ended up just enslaving them. And so for 400 years, they were in slavery. Moses was a Jewish-born boy that was saved from Pharaoh, who was killing every baby boy born. So after Moses grows up in the house of Pharaoh, after being saved out of the Nile, he realizes that he's a Jew, flees Egypt. But then in the wilderness, God comes to him and calls him to go back and get Pharaoh to let his people go, to let the Hebrews go. Moses was...
Not Charlton Heston?
Not Charlton Heston. I don't know if he bore any resemblance to the actual Moses. By God's command to go tell Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go out of slavery, and if he would not, 10 plagues were going to come on the Egyptian people.
Moses was commanded, and his response was, "Here am I, send Aaron."
Basically.
Here am I, send Aaron.
Moses sits there, and just like we do, okay, he argues with God, send somebody else, I can't talk, I can't do this, I can't do that, here am I, send Aaron.
That's really funny. Nevertheless, Moses and Aaron went, and Pharaoh would not let the people go. The plagues began to rain down on Egypt. There were frogs, plagues of locusts, boils, water turning to blood, all kinds of terrible things. The last one was going to be the death of every firstborn in the nation. And God commanded the Hebrews to kill a lamb and to take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorpost and on the lintel of the door, so that when the angel of death came through that night, they would be spared. So the title came from the angel of death passing over the households of those who had the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel.
You can find the fuller narrative of this in Exodus 12.
If you want to read a little bit more of the backstory, that would be helpful. So Exodus 12, starting in verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month every man shall take a lamb, according to their fathers' houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you, when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven out of your houses, for if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the 7th, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the 7th day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days. For what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. If anyone eats what is leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he's a sojourner or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places you shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans, and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that's in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and for your sons forever. And when you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, What do you mean by this service? You shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. For he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses. And the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then the people of Israel went and did so, as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Before they did this, God commanded them to get rid of all leaven in their house.
There were other things too that he told them to do. He said, After you roast your meat, in this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in hand, and you shall eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
God was communicating their deliverance was at hand, associated with this Passover meal, with this
Be ready to
event. Go. Right, be ready to go. Your deliverance is going to take place after this sacrifice is made.
Yep.
After this event here.
There is so much symbolism.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous how much is tied up in Jesus. That's also tied up in Passover. So much of it is clearly communicated.
Grant and I are both Jewish from descent. We celebrate Passover with our family every year. Grant celebrated it growing up with his family, and we still do. When we had our own children, we decided we were going to basically sit down and kind of formulate our own Haggadah, which is like their format for the Passover.
Liturgy, basically.
Yeah. When we started doing that, when we sat down and started studying what we were going to do with our own family and our own kids, we saw so much symbolism from the Passover story to basically just Jesus.
The gospel story. Mm-hmm. So Leviticus chapter 23 is when God institutes their calendar, basically the feasts during the year that the Israelites were supposed to celebrate, one of them being Passover. So every year in the springtime, they were to rehearse what they did on that night to be saved from the angel of death. So they do the same thing. They get all 11 out of their house, they cook a lamb, and then remember the deliverance.
In verse 14 of Exodus 12, it says, "This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast." He says, "You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and your sons forever. And when you come to the land that the Lord has given to you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?' you shall say, 'It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses.'" It was set up to be a memorial to be kept by Israel forever, that they would always look back and see God's hand of mercy upon them.
Right. To see his hand of deliverance and redemption.
The meal for Passover is symbolic of the meal that we eat for communion.
Go on. I liked your connection here to the Lord's Supper.
In this meal, we're united to Christ. This meal marks our identity as God's people as we eat together in faith, referring to where Paul talks about communion, the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians. In this meal, we're united to Christ, our great Savior, and the Lamb without blemish. Now, one of the things that they did as well with that meal is that they were told they had to eat it, and anything that they did not eat that night, they had to burn the next morning. Looking forward, and I don't want to go down a rabbit trail very far, okay?
Okay.
Once they crossed, and then the Israelites were complaining about food and the manna, they were told the manna would be no good in the morning, or the next morning you got enough for you to eat for that day, and then it was no good. Right. Except on the Sabbath, then you collected the day before the Sabbath, you collected for 2 days.
Right.
And I wonder if, looking to their time in the wilderness, if these don't refer to each other at all.
Yeah, maybe. I think maybe it points to dependence upon God for our sustenance and for our sustainment of life, really. Maybe since God was delivering them quickly after this Passover, that was another symbol of, kind of eating with the sandals on and eating with your belt fastened. It was a readiness thing because they shouldn't be carrying needless things on their journey out of Egypt. So yeah, it might be pointing to the same as with the idea of manna, to trusting God for our daily bread. So how does this... Well,
that's all the further down that rabbit trail I want to go, Grant.
I think the more you think about the Passover, probably the more connections you could draw, really.
I know, we could probably tease this out for a really long time.
Verse 46 of chapter 12, one of the directions given to the institution of Passover was that you shall not break any of the lamb's bones.
Psalm 34, verse 20, and it just says, "He keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken." And then John includes